From Wilmette Institute, welcome to Changing Course Labcast.
Welcome to the Wilmette Institute podcast series. I'm your host, Emily Chou. In each episode, we explore vital issues with profound implications for humanity, such as race unity, education, environmental stewardship, and social change. Through thoughtful conversation, we're joined by scholars, practitioners, and change makers who help us to connect ideas to meaningful action. Wilmette Institute is an online learning community grounded in an evolving Baha'i framework for collective learning. Through our accredited certificate program, we invite learners to advance their academic and professional paths while also exploring current discourses and social transformation within their fields of study. Through dynamic consultation with peers and faculty and engagement in real-world grassroots efforts, participants develop the capacity to become skilled protagonists in their careers and communities. Thank you for being part of this learning journey. Let's begin. Our guest today is Julia Berger. Julia, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. So as for myself, I've recently joined the Wilmette Institute as a curriculum development specialist, and I'm also adjunct faculty in the Department of Religion at Montclair State University, right here in Montclair, New Jersey. Before joining the Wilmette Institute this year, I was a researcher and a writer with the Baha'i International Communities United Nations office, and for several years also served with the Association for Baha'i Studies for North America. In the last 5 years, though, my interest has really evolved from research more into pedagogy, and I've become very interested in how students learn and what are the methods and the content and the kinds of teacher capacities that we need to make education really transformative and meaningful for our students.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And very aligned to what Wilmette's goals are also. So that's very nice. We're super glad to have you here. And our topic today is about multiple ways of knowing and being. So I'm wondering, do you have a story or some reflections that you'd like to share about this concept of multiple ways of knowing and being?
Yeah, well, this is a concept that really Wilmette Institute courses brought into my attention. I remember thinking, okay, well, multiple ways of knowing. What does that really mean? Why do we even need to think about that? And I think usually when we think about knowledge, we think about content, and we might think about, well, what do we know? What do our students know? And maybe some teachers are thinking, and they might imagine, well, yes, there are visual learners and auditory learners, but the conversations in the Wilmette courses really go quite far beyond that. And what this course made me think about when I looked back on my own formal education and ways of knowing, and I think about getting a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree and then a PhD, I realized it had trained me in one way of knowing. And that was really through reading, writing, research, publications, conference presentations. And so it started this journey of reflection on, well, what are some of the assumptions underlying these methods? And, you realize, okay, well, that kind of learning is quite solitary. We think about knowledge residing in experts who have a number of publications. We think about titles and degrees. There's an element of competition to that. And then there are certain aspects of the human experience that somehow don't find a place in this model. So you think about like our subjective life, the relational dimension, emotional experience, spiritual dimension, to name a few. And I don't want to deny that a lot of great work comes out of PhDs, and we need that, and it's good. But I thought that was the modality that could bear, fruit. So I think the course kind of helped me to step back and widen my perspective a bit and think about, well, okay, what are the sources of knowledge, and how do we learn, through the intellect, but also through the heart, through our emotive dimension, through our body, through the arts. And it was wonderful. We read this article by Leanne Simpson about the idea of land as pedagogy. So how is land a context for generating knowledge and intelligence in Indigenous communities? And what does learning look like? So to give one concrete example, when we come across terms from cultures outside of the Western intellectual tradition, like knowledge keepers or wisdom keepers in indigenous traditions, or storytellers, which is a nearly universal method of transmitting cultural knowledge and values, or even more generally, elders and ancestors, these exist outside of our Western degree granting institutions. So what kind of knowledge are they holding? Like, how did they learn? So I started basically trying to bring this into my Religion 101 classroom at Montclair State University. My students come from so many different backgrounds, and most of them have parents born outside of the United States. So I kind of began asking myself, rather than focusing on all the ways that the students were somehow not aligning with our academic norms, I started trying to see what kind of knowledge is coming into the classroom. Had students who maybe have served in the military, or whose parents are ministers or pastors, or who are bilingual, who've lived outside of the United States, and all kinds of different life experiences. So there's a lot of knowing that comes into the class. And I don't think I was as equipped to see it before taking this course. So again, I'm not throwing away academic standards. My students need to pass, they need to read, they need to do the work. But I think with this different perspective, I feel better equipped to create an environment in which students will be motivated and in which the whole student will feel seen in the class.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. So are there other things that you're thinking about, like through your research, or that you've been thinking about in the view of like this idea of like having these relationships really be part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think another way that I feel my eyes and my understanding has been expanded is thinking about research through the lens of building relationships. I think for most of my life, I thought about research in terms of information. I'm going to use this information. I'm going to write a great paper. It's going to get published, hopefully, in the right journal, which will then maybe lead to being published with the right publisher, then maybe the right job. There's kind of this instrumentality that ran through it. And that worked out okay. Was it the most satisfying thing? No, but there are certain things you have to do. Mm-hmm. So then I started thinking about research from the point of view of relationships, and through some of the readings in this course. And then a colleague of mine at Montclair State University introduced me to a book about Indigenous research methods. I did not know this field existed, it had been as developed. And, briefly, one of the points that the book makes is that it's called research. Research is ceremony. So it says that the purpose of any ceremony is to build stronger relationships, or to bridge the distance between ourselves and aspects of our world. And so we could think of Indigenous research methodologies as a kind of ceremony that allows us to, gain higher levels of consciousness and understanding about our world. And that's an interesting way to think about, what is happening when we're engaging with somebody. We're not just receiving information, we're actually strengthening a relationship. And it was interesting as I spoke further to my colleague, these questions come up of, well, these relational research methods are much more time intensive. Relationships are not as predictable as other kinds of interviews. And so it doesn't neatly fit into like a Western university. And that's a topic for another podcast. But anyways, it got me thinking just about the many interviews I've done in my life in this research context, thinking of them quite functionally. But, now I look back and I think about some of the richest interviews, and even now moving forward, thinking about it in this way, I'm realizing that the depth of the pre-existing relationship of trust, respect, mutual curiosity, friendship, maybe an admiration of each other's work, this true sense of collaboration just yields a much richer kind of knowledge. And I hadn't really paid much attention to that.
Yeah. And that this research really does come from this understanding that we're two human beings connecting, and that's how we can learn together. It's one of the modalities. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So I know you're also currently taking some courses to complete the Wilmette Institute certificate program. And now you mentioned you're also part of the Wilmette Institute team. So I'm curious also what led you to just even take one of the first courses, and how's that journey been for you?
It was an interesting moment. I think as I started to transition from academic research into teaching, I had this sense that the teaching as well as community-based initiatives, I had this sense that, like, what do I actually bring to each endeavor? Well, I'm a hardworking person. I can work with others. We can get things done. But really, the main thing I felt that I could bring to any space, whether it's a classroom or another initiative, is like my vision of social justice and human flourishing, and everything else that grows out of that. So I wanted to actually study a coherent framework for social change that I could bring to these different settings, perhaps not even explicitly, but I wanted to feel that my thinking was sound and coherent. So, what would such a framework, say about justice and unity? And, how do we lift up the voices of those who we don't hear, or who might be silenced in other ways? How do we work together across different worldviews? Like, how does that go together? And beyond that, I knew that I did not want to study this by myself. I didn't want like another solitary project. I was looking for a learning community, and I knew I wanted to study with others. And I didn't want to study it as an abstraction. I wanted to see how are others also trying to learn about these frameworks. How are they applying it? Like, I wanted it to really be alive, and that's what took me to Wilmette.
Yeah. I feel I had a similar experience of just, there's so much to learn about how we approach, for me and also you, I'm sure, education in a way that actually embodies these principles as we work within like the system ourselves also. And so, yeah, I think having so many others together thinking about this process together has really helped my understanding, and I'm sure your understanding also.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yeah, I'm also curious. I know you're a student, you're also an educator, and I'm curious. You've talked a little bit about the pedagogy and how it's helped inform your work, but how has your experience with the pedagogy of the Wilmette Institute courses contributed to your own transformation?
Well, I'm a work in progress, as I think we all are, but it's been really interesting, and it took me back to this idea of having a beginner's mind, because you do a PhD and you sort of have a sense, or maybe you're made to feel that maybe you've climbed the pinnacle of something. And so 7 years after having completed my PhD, walking into a graduate class with others, and realizing, okay, this is an entirely new way of thinking and being, and it's not a language that I'm fluent in, and it felt great. Like, it felt exciting to just be in that rich learning space again. And just to give one example about how it was different. So the instructors would start each class with a piece of music, maybe some soul, maybe some jazz, pop, hip hop, and then we really thought about the lyrics and, what was this artist trying to say? And there's this social commentary there that now I was discovering with others. And, I would immediately take that piece of music and then use it in my own class because it was so effective in our setting. So I think it signaled to me, and hopefully to then my own students, that we're not just going to learn with the head. We're going to try to feel something. And, I love this phrase that came up in our course in Spanish, no es saber, es sentir. And sometimes to really know something, you have to feel it. And, that's different. That's not something that we encounter in all of our classes. So, and I guess the other thing I would say is it's been so cool. We do a course project that our course is structured around. So I got to go out and have 4 conversations with somebody who is involved in a really transformative educational initiative, a colleague that I really admired who was doing this pioneering work in Native American and Indigenous studies, and the way he was kind of exposing his students to this way of being and knowing. And so what I really learned after these 4 hours of like deep mind expanding conversations, as I wrote in my reflections, was that I began to experience that research could be a sacred relational act, and that the soil for the generation of knowledge is tilled with love, generosity, patience, and trust.
That is
Yeah.
beautiful. And I also wanted to ask, I know you've taken multiple courses with the Wilmette Institute, and I was curious what your experience was a little bit in the first course and how the conversation was towards how you maybe approached it in the second course and what you've learned kind of being part of that process also.
Well, it is interesting because I in the first course project, again, we needed to have multiple conversations, and I think I defaulted to my transactional mode. So I chose, two people that I didn't know but held very interesting positions at the university, and it was okay. And I asked my questions, but it wasn't. It wasn't as smooth as I might have wanted it to be. I didn't feel as comfortable in that space, sharing my own ideas. And I was a little bit frustrated with myself. And so I had to really sit with it and understand, there's a framework shift going on. Like I'm learning to think about research differently. And it has kind of people and relationships at the center. And it's just going to take a bit of time. So I think now in the second course, just really reflecting on that first experience, I really thought about, what is a relationship that I can really build something from. And so it was interesting to have experienced that, and maybe good to have had that first experience to really drive the point home.
Yeah. I think that's like one of the beautiful things also about the Wilmette courses is that, there is this process of, acting and reflecting and studying and consulting and going through this kind of process of having these conversations and learning the whole thing of, should I email the person? Should I call the person? Should I do this? And then do I ask these questions? Should I come in with a list of resources? And really learning that to understand what the reality is of the person that we want to talk to and having that relationship first. And I love that you mentioned that research, as you have a ton of experience in academic research. So that research actually can be a sacred relational act. And that is so profound to know that research doesn't always, like we've mentioned, just start with the things in your head and stay there, that it involves the humans also involved in that. So that was beautiful. I really appreciate all these valuable insights you've shared. And before we go, I wanted to ask if there's any actionable steps that you think the listeners could take from the things that you've learned in the courses.
I just think, if you're in a similar place, maybe transitional place, where you feel that your interests are growing and evolving, if you're involved in community initiatives or, even as parents, we're learning all the time and trying to understand our own kids better and other kids in our community. I think what I loved about these courses is they stretch your thinking. They help you to step back from ways that you've always done and thought things in a way that has felt natural, but you realize it's constructed and there are other ways. And, but I think by connecting with others who are studying with you, I think you begin to see, at least your classroom, but you begin to see other people in the world in a different way.
Yeah, totally agree. So you recommend that people should just take the course.
I think I recommend you should take the course. You should take at least one course, but hopefully all three. Yeah.
Yes, agreed. I also would recommend you do the same. So, Julia, I really appreciate your time and appreciate your contributions to our conversation. It was so helpful to hear how your experience in academia and in education your framework has also shifted as you've taken these courses and how meaningful that is. So I appreciate you sharing that with our listeners, and we'll see everyone on the next one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay inspired. Until next time.